can speak to really the go-go building years of Mike Raymond. I mean, that's kind of what I bring to the table. Yes, and Becky Brummagem and Denise coming in and Paul, you know, that, and how did we get Greg Bender? I mean, I can give you that story.
Right.
You know, and if I don't get to that, you could say, tell me about Greg Bender. Because he was such a pivotal part of it, but he's literally, well, we can talk about that.
Yes.
So Ed, whenever you're ready. I'm rolling. Or am I rolling? Okay, you're rolling.
So hi, I'm Steve Waterson. I'm the Community Relations Director at the Resource Center. Today is March 30th, 2021, and I'm sitting here with local attorney and legend Greg Peterson. Greg had reached out suggesting that we get together and have a chat because Greg has been involved with the Resource Center for almost 45 years, and he's certainly the longest tenured person that I know of who's still around at TRC. And he was kind enough to offer to sit down and let us pick his brain a little bit and his memories, and so that we can document some of the historical information that Greg has locked away in his head. So Greg, thank you very much.
My honor to be here.
Just a little background for people who don't know you. Just give us a little brief biographical background then leading up to when you joined the Resource Center, got involved with the Resource Center in 1977.
Good question. I'll try to give you a Reader's Digest. Born in Jamestown, graduate of Jamestown High School, 1969, Allegheny College, 1973, Dickinson School of Law, 1976. Involved in the community throughout the process, through the high school and college time periods, would come back and work here. But when I graduated from law school in when I was in law school, 1975, I did a summer internship with the law firm of Cadwell and Sharp. My dad knew Sherwood Cadwell through the Manufacturers Association, and Ms. Sherry was asking about, you know, tell me about your son, da-da-da-da, he's in his second year of law school. Well, have him call me, and maybe we can work in the summer. I worked that summer between my second and last year of law school. They have never hired their summer interns. They'd just had them, and that was it. But I applied when I got back for my senior year, and they accepted. To the chagrin of my girlfriend, soon-to-be fiancée, soon-to-be wife, who was from New Jersey, think that I should come back. Anyways, we did, and it worked out incredibly well. Still married for the camera. And so I worked with Cadwell and Sharp, which was Sherry Cadwell and Robert Sharp. Sherry Cadwell had a brother named Sam Cadwell. Sam was developmentally disabled. And as a result, Sherry Cadwell had more than a passing interest in the welfare of his brother. Looked out after him, took care of him on many fronts. And though I'm not completely sure of the timetable, but I see in looking at this that in 1959, Sherry was on the board of then, I think it was called the the Achievement Center?
Boy, you know, I think back then we were even called Friends of People with Mental Retardation, something like that, Friends and Family, something like that.
And so, and he might have been one of the incorporators when the chapter was created of that. So early on, Sherry Cadwell was involved and continued to be on as their probably pro bono counselor, attorney. And so when I came back with the firm, they were looking for, I think, guidance and help and energy. Excuse me. So he thought, hey, they got this brand new executive director named Michael Raymond. He's highly energetic. You're young, he's young. Why don't you see if you can, I'll introduce you and get you involved. Well, little did I realize that shortly thereafter, Mike, we gathered together, and I became a member of the board, and one of only two, I should point out, developmentally disabled, mentally retarded at the time, family members. It was principally parents and other relatives, uncles, aunts, and there were only two of us, John Reel and me, who were not familial with that. So they could have, under the bylaws, a minority of members of the board. I was one of them. Just so happened to be really minority of two of us. And John Reel, I want to talk to him about, about him just a second. John, Irishman, he was the office manager of the facility known as the former Art Metal. And John was on the board, I think because of that fact. At the time, I'm going to continue to use the term, at the time was the Achievement Center, was a tenant in one of the floors of the Art Metal building. And they also had some other locations. But that was the one where Mike was focusing on that building, which was really a big lift. And what I remember the most is how John was compassionate about the project, but he was a business guy. His goal was to get that huge building sold. And so he entered into very creative leases, of which I negotiated with Mike, and we ultimately had kind of a condominium by floor project, where when we filled in floor one, the front part of the building, we would then use the cafeteria and behind it, floor one, floor two, and sort of worked our way through the entire building until at some point John, who had the authority of the owners of the Art Metal building, which was not Art Metal, it was Heller, Walter Heller Company. And so they, very creatively, the Achievement Center bought the building.
And this is the building that's on Jones and Gifford Avenue.
And, yes,
that had
thank you.
been
It's on the building now on Jones Gifford Avenue, which has, in fact, Michael Raymond's name on it. And it was really through John Reel that made that a reality. And he was an Irishman. He was just kind of a 5x5 guy, and compassionate but rough voice, man. Just, you weren't going to mess with John. And we didn't. And so it was an interesting partnership where he was on the board, but at the same time, our landlord. And so he worked through a process which ultimately they bought all the facilities around there, which were owned by Art Metal, which then became subsequently not only part of the programming, but then when the Allied Industries came into play, we had a location right there. And so that's a little bit of perhaps a diversion on John Reel that maybe not everybody is aware of, but a critical component to the life of the Resource Center at a time because he could match the energy of Mike Raymond. Worth talking about him for a second, and he'll be brought up a lot. An incredible, charismatic person. Mike was not from this area. He had, I believe, a brother that was developmentally disabled. So he came at it with passion. He wanted to make a better life.
And just I'll interrupt just for a second.
No,
for the
please do.
timeline purposes, for people who don't know, Mike Raymond came on board as the executive director of the Resource Center in 1974. And I think shortly thereafter, we purchased and opened our first group home So Mike, as Greg's, I'm sure going to talk about, Mike was a mover shaker and got things done. So Greg, sorry.
No, it's great to help me, because really if you could put a timeline, my time to start with the Resource Center was 1977. And so Mike had just been there for a couple of years. They did have their first group home, which that was important in Westfield. And at the same time, they had relocated to our metal, kind of the front part of the building. And then because we had the art metal, which was where they made metal desks, it was a manufacturing facility. And I remember we bought it without any due diligence regarding environmental, it was like, it's a lease with an option to purchase. John always said, you can lease, you can option to lease, you can then ultimately have an option to purchase. He had a number in mind. So he basically fed us little by little as then we got contracts. And the Allied Service was created in 1978, I believe. And they got a military contract, which on tent pins. And that was there's now became a wood manufacturing location in addition to everything else. It happened fairly quickly where things were happening, but this was Mike, because Mike at the time was very closely aligned to the New York State Department of Mental Health, Mental Hygiene, I don't know the acronym, but the source of money where because of an order, and you have to help me with this, Steve, of the group home that was found, and they had to get people out of those big.
The Willowbrook consent decree, yes.
Willowbrook consent decree. That created a great deal of political power to provide money to organizations which could provide alternate work sites, alternate living facilities, and Mike knew that. And Mike had a pipeline, if you will, and his mind was in overdrive all the time. And he was working with an architect like Bob Lund and was looking at locations within Chautauqua County, North County, South County, for the idea of facilities, buying older buildings, having rents, and where it would be paid for, or mortgages that would be paid for by the state. I should pause there. This gets me in another divergent. One of the group homes, I remember this was right around here, 4th or 5th Avenue, 5th Street. And it was owned by a landlord, and we were renting it as a group home. Northwest had a mortgage on it. Northwest was foreclosing on the landlord, and we had a lease. And our lease was subsequent to the mortgage, so if there was a mortgage foreclosure, maybe our lease would end and our tenants would leave. And that was a crisis, because there was one other one which was in a process of being foreclosed, again by Northwest. So there was a decision, conversation Mike and I had, and then ultimately the board, to create a for-profit corporation called Chautauqua Rehabilitation Facilities Corp. Excuse me. And it was that entity, well, I remember going to Warren and meeting with the president, a guy named Hannah, and suggesting that go ahead and foreclose, but we, the tenant, would buy it for the mortgage amount, so they'd make them whole, and sign a long-term lease. So Chautauqua Rehabilitation Facilities Corp. would buy it, a for-profit organization, and in turn lease it to the Resource Center, and we would have built within it it's a triple net lease, so the tenant would pay all the upkeep, taxes and everything, and we were being reimbursed by the state. And so that was and understandably so, because we were separate entities. for-profit, not-for-profit. And that became the model, that the house here, 4th or 5th Street, became the model for several real estate acquisitions, many of them conversions from current landlords. We just would buy them out, so we could control our site. Nobody wanted to find where we invested so much money in a house to adapt it for our client use, and then have to get out because the landlord didn't pay the rent or pay the mortgage payments. So to protect ourselves, we did that. So I think in our zenith, Chautauqua Rehab may have had, you can correct me, Steve, but maybe 15, 20 locations throughout the county, which we own. That became a little less down the road problematic because the state was taking a position that even though there were separate entities and even though it was arm's length, we always got appraisals and we did everything as far as the rental, fair market rentals. But if they were owned by the same entity, ultimately NYSARC, through the various corporate involvements, we couldn't get reimbursed for the taxes. And I'm now way ahead of the timeline, but then that required a difficult decision because we were very proud. The Resource Center was paying lots of taxes to the city of Jamestown. But a very difficult decision when the state stopped the reimbursement. We could not take money out of operations to pay taxes and essentially folded title into the not-for-profits and applied for tax exemption with the city. We would make host payments and other arrangements, but that terrific win-win-win situation ended at a certain point. That's sort of on the residential real estate side of the Resource Center. In addition, there was group homes that were being built, Harris Street, and Hunt Road, a couple of them on Hunt Road, Celron, all because Mike had the vision and the state funding, and it was heck, we even had Governor Mario Cuomo come here, and it was a big announcement at the city, and that was masterful. By the way, just an aside, it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. We were in the City Hall conference room, City Council conference room, and the governor comes in, and he's a charismatic person. Anyways, and so he's shaking hands with everybody in the room. Hi, I'm Governor Cuomo. Yes, I'm Greg Peterson, attorney. I'm Mike Raymond. I'm this, I'm that. I'm a custom client. I'm this. And next thing you know, with no notes, the governor is speaking, and he manages to weave in everybody there. I mean, I'm telling you, you can't not, North people cannot do that. You just met them. Wow. It was magic. So I was always, I'll never forget that day. There are many magical days in the Resource Center history, but that was one of them. But those group homes, which are still in existence, still very active today, really was a brainchild of Michael's. And he sensed, because of the Willowbrook decree at the time, the funding nerve of the state, and we became a model. I mean, many, many counties came here or dragged Mike out there to figure out, how'd you do this? Well, I got to tell you, it was Mike's force of personality. I'm not sure even I have a good video of him, but his laughter was perhaps the most infectious thing you'd ever meet, and he was a professional genius when it came to this. I know I'm bouncing a little bit, but let me go through the board members I was on the board twice really for significant periods of time, but maybe I could just go through briefly some of the ones I interacted with and provide a little background. When I came, President was Harold Swanson. And most every one of the people I'm going to name were parents and or relatives of family members who had developmental disabilities. That's the term that is used now. That wasn't the term used then. But Harold was the president. And the principal agenda usually was bus schedules, worrying about my son wasn't picked up on time. Something like that. And so again, it was pretty parochial. It was John Reel, who, again, on the board at the time, who said, wait a minute, we're a business. We can't be worrying about your kid being picked up. Now, that was a tough thing to say to parents. Real tough. And I kind of, as the young kid, saying, okay. But he was right. So it became a little more, agendas became more business-like, less personal. There was always opportunity to talk about that. Harold was followed by Elmer Minch, and I should point out, and I'm not sure which budget it was, whether it was Harold's 77 budget or 78, somewhere in that area, which was the first $1 million budget. I remember the night we passed that, don't remember the year, but that was kind of like, wow, guys. Here we are, a bunch of parents to support family members, more of a support group, and we are actually going to raise $1 million and expend $1 million for this cause. Unbelievable. I mean, it was elation and trepidation. Like, okay, man, that's big numbers for us. So that's an assignment, Steve. I'm not sure what it was, but there was a moment in time. And these people who subsequently became presidents, like Elmer Minch became president, and he was from the North County.
Yes.
And these people, no matter what the weather, they came. Coming down from Stockton, Fredonia, Dunkirk, and our meetings were mostly in Jamestown. And they were monthly. It was a real chore. These guys all had day jobs, but they were so dedicated. And so, again, me, without having that parental blood connection, watching this happen was very exciting. And at the same time, at the end of the table was Mike Raymond, with the idea of the minute, not month, idea of the minute. And I having to traipse around with him to make sure contracts were signed and he wasn't shaking hands and cutting deals with nothing to support it. So our file, when I finally purged it recently, was a lot of stuff. But Elmer there, then was followed by, and these are presidents, Joe Trusso. Joe was a labor leader. Joe had family members who were developmentally disabled, and also subsequently family members who worked there, still do. And Joe lovingly was a force of nature. He was a union guy, and I don't mean that disparagingly, but kind of that fist pounding, to make a point, and frankly would rattle the parents. Joe, bang, bang, bang. Now, I was a young guy, but I also had a mentor, Sherry Cadwell, who negotiated labor contracts and therefore brought me in. So that was a non-intimidating point. So it got to be where Joe would get exercised over something, always for the good of the clients, I might add. Just Joe's heart, huge, but he had a mannerism, board mannerism, which most people weren't used to. So it'd be my job to come in saying, wait a minute, enough, Joe, or counteract it to kind of bring everything, the temperature down so we could get the work done. And I loved doing it, and we were the best, and up until his passing, the best of friends. And he appreciated my role, and I appreciated his role, all for the good of the cause. But it made for an interesting board dynamic. I'm going to digress again. When I went off the board the first time after many years, termed off, Paul Shazana was then the executive director. Sorry, Paul, but I'll tell the story. He calls me one day. He goes, "Greg, we need you back." And I've done my time. No. I need you back because Joe is still on the board and he's still asserting himself. We need you as a counterbalance. So I came back a second time for that reason only. That reason only. And again, Joe said, "Oh my gosh, here's Greg again." And I don't have the temper that goes with Joe's, but I could at least talk to him and bring him back down. So that was my role. It was Paul brought me in for that as a ninth inning for the last few years of my board tenure.
That's fascinating.
And we actually, I think we left the same year.
Yes, yeah, 2005.
Yeah, and that got to be a smile on everybody's face that now both you guys can go into the sunset. So anyways, that's Joe Trusso, and a guy who had no bigger heart for the Resource Center. Nobody than Joe Trusso. Nobody. But he was a force of nature.
And I'll add that, Joe was always in the corner of our employees, and our annual Employee of the Year award is in fact named for Joe Trusso.
Mm-hmm. And rightfully so. That's a well-deserved honor. The next one, Wilbur Dennison. Wilbur was a farmer up in Cassadaga area, and salt of the earth. But he had so much common sense. It's one of those incredible people that you come across in life where, you could be coming in from the field and hands, just you shook his hand, you'd go to your knees because he was a man of the earth. But boy, he had real good common sense. He'd be the first to admit that he didn't know everything and he wasn't book educated, but for our purposes, to be passionate and compassionate, Wilbur was really right up there. After that, Tony and Grail. Tony was a television salesman, and Tony was terrific. He and his wife Sarah went to several conventions. He was actively involved, and again, I'm trying to think whether his some family member, may have been his brother, was developmentally disabled. Then Mike Felice, who was station manager of WKSN, was the president. He had his daughter Jennifer, and brief story, when I received the Achievement Award, Lifetime Achievement Award recently, I called her up, and when I was giving my presentation, the award I gave to her as emblematic of what her family has meant, her dad and mom, Mike and Laura, but also just, for all the clients that are being served. And it was a moment, I was moved by having the moment itself, and I was part of it. So recently, Dennis Webster gave me the tape. I turned it into a little bit of a YouTube picture with some pictures, and as I was listening to it, I got choked up. But that was all part of the Felice family relationship, and I had many fond memories of Mike and Laura, but they were dedicated. I mean, right to the end for Mike. Mike was continuing on in various capacities as far as being an officer, board member, foundation, and of course, one of our corporate buildings is named after him. Wayne Hoteling, daughter, Laura, is the basis of Laura's Run, which my interviewer, Steve Waterson, was intimately involved in all of that, incredibly successful, highly publicized and covered, and it got tremendous amount of the community involved that otherwise would have no knowledge of that at all. And that was Willie Wayne, and his wife's name is
Elaine.
Elaine, thank you. This is, again, magic. Bill Hange and his wife were, again, followed up as presidents for 3 years. Bill was, I think, from Lakewood area.
I think from Buffalo originally, but came down Lakewood and was operating Sunset Hill Cemetery.
That's it, yeah. And Bill was, again, all these guys were so dedicated. Marie Karuba, attorney, she ran the Southern Tier Environment for the Living, but actively interested in the Resource Center for a long period of time. And it continues to be very active with us, and also on city council. And by the way, she's the one that introduced and said very nice words about me. So, you know, and Marie was I was the attorney for a long period of time, and then they started to get people who would take pieces of the Resource Center from the legal aspect of it. And then ultimately, I don't think Marie was in-house counsel, but she was helpful in doing the guardianship, Article 18, guardianships for the mentally retarded. Which then led Paul and I to talk about we should have in-house counsel, which subsequently hired one and then have had them ever since.
You know, something else about Marie, when she came on board for Southern Tier Environments for Living, that was part of the Resource Center when it first started. And then a year or two after that, branched out and became its own entity. So I think that's how she initially came to be associated with us. And it's been almost 40 years now.
I know, I didn't know that. Yeah. It's a good thing I showed up. Then after Marie, Jim Chimente, Jim JCC, professor. Yeah, Clemson, in case you see his hat, walking around Lakewood. And that was kind of the beginning of the time, which was a little bit, well, there was a period of time where we got to be a little bit stressful relations with our New York State Association for Retarded Children, the main chapter, and us. And so there was stress points in litigation, and I think Jim may have been right in the middle of all that at the time with Paul. We might talk a little bit about that later. Harry Glatz, indefatigable. His son had a very difficult seizure, I believe it was, and which led to him becoming developmentally disabled, like overnight. And Harry and his wife, Dodie, I think he retired from dentistry at that point and just dedicated their lives to making the betterment of their son. And the outlet was the Resource Center. And Harry, if we could name another building after anybody, it would be Harry. And just passed away last year, I think. Just terrific. Then I'm not sure, I went off the board, I think, in 2005. Harry was the last president, and then after that, Carol Lawrence, Mike Metzger, but a series of people who were high-end community people. Talking about community, Glad you asked, Steve. One of the things I'm really proud of is when I got started, the Resource Center had a not so pleasant reputation. Heard it from several people, and excuse me for saying it, repeating it, but an organization which is sort of caring for the unwashed, the mentally retarded, you know, the people who don't add much to society. And I know I spent many times at board meetings, because I was wearing a couple of hats as a lawyer, involved in the community, and I would hear it from the community, and I would get the reflection from the staff members who I dealt with all the time because of that law aspect. And to encourage, and it wasn't part of the governance or the corporate philosophy, to encourage to get involved with the chambers of commerce, to have people come to visit the group homes, to have director of development, director of finance, what our various vice presidents were, to get out in the community, shine a light. And I can remember, this didn't happen, but I remember Merrill Rosen and came to me and said, Greg, this is a great idea. We got to create something which shows the people that not only we're doing good things, but we employ a lot of people. We are an economic development engine. So we're going to pay everybody for a month in cash, not a check, cash, which the law says you must pay everybody in cash. That's what the law says, unless you get a waiver. And of course, everybody gets a waiver. But he wanted them to pay cash and wanted to give everybody $2 bills. This is Merrill. Brilliant. Brilliant. And so everybody would be handed cash in their envelope, $2. So when you're paying, you're getting $2 bills. And I actually went to the Department of Labor. I went way down the road, actually went to our banks, which was the source for how many $2 bills can you get? You know, we went way down the road. And ultimately, I mean, I have a file pretty thick about the $2 bill episodes. And everybody liked it because it was a gimmick. Merrill was good at gimmicks. And it would have just lit up the community. Where'd you get the $2 bills? Well, somebody from the Resource Center. But that was part of a time where we were trying to get positive exposure. And part of what we were trying to do is to get our staff members off from behind their desk out into the community. There's incredibly quality people in those early days of the Becky Brummagens and the Bruce Piazzas and the Lou Lombardos. And now I'm going to get in trouble, but missing names that I should have instantly recalled. Sorry, whoever is watching this now. But they did. And they started to get involved, and then all of a sudden, the Rotaries were asking for them to talk. And I remember driving Mike, because he was, for as outgoing as he was, there was a private side to him. And he really didn't like doing it. So he and I would be a tag team. I'd be the guy that would know the community, and then Mike would, get him going. And of course, once he got going, he was unbelievable. But I'm proud of the fact that at least I was part of the beginning of community engagement from the Resource Center, which found form. And I mean, as you go down the road and you look at the timeline, you think about not only Laura's Run, you think about old-time fairs, you think about Gus Macker, and then the Kappa Golf Tournament, which are now community, or were, and some of them are, reference points to tremendously engaged, which put the Resource Center as a equal not-for-profit partner in the community with hospitals, the WCA, with nursing homes like Lutheran and Heritage, and actually getting to a point, and I was so proud, where I could pull together the Murray Marshes and the Norm Bergs and Don Coulters, subsequently Smeltzers, and all these people with the Paul Shazanas. So all of a sudden, we all have similar health training, nurse needs, commonalities, Medicaid funding. And so they actually started collaborating. That's a long ways from being a not-for-profit for the unwashed. And as I look at that timeline, I think about those things. And when you're in it now and you enjoy it now, you don't know what it was like. It's, in those early days. Because it was, you're really the Resource Center of all the, other organizations you're involved in. Why that one? And you really, once you explain the amount of taxes we're paying, the amount of payroll you have, and all of a sudden we created 4 or 5 bullet points. Oh, really? Oh, really? I didn't know that. Well, that's, frankly, our job was needed to get out there to tell that story. So now, when I go to various, even now, fraternal organizations and see members of the Resource Center or in leadership roles, it's very kind of neat. It's kind of neat. I know I sidetracked a little bit. Let me go back and talk about some of the kind of notable board members who were not officers. The one that just jumps is Joe Caprino. Joe Caprino had a son who was developmentally disabled, 2 daughters who were not, but who were involved with Joe and Mary. And nobody had more time thinking about how to benefit his son Anthony and the good of the Resource Center. And Joe, the ultimate entrepreneur. Joe Caprino's were the best cost less. I lived on Allendale, which is the south side of town, and you could tell any summer night there'd be lights in the sky, Klieg lights, like Hollywood. And it was Joe having a sale. And Joe, then I got to know him through the board. And we would meet always at Jones and Gifford for the board meetings, and then he would always invite everybody to his house on Pleasant View. I think that's where the group home is, in Pleasant View. And his wife would put out a spread, and I'd bring out a wine and drink. And it became another reason to go to board meetings, frankly. And it was just wonderful. But it also created a great degree of collegiality among the board and the staff members who attended the board meetings, because many of them from the North County, and nobody really knew them. And Joe, as he was expanded from his 2nd Street facility, created environment where he, like John Rio earlier in the history, where creatively we could buy at a very take fair market value, discount it, and Joe would sell it to us, hold the paper, do whatever to make it possible. So we'd buy part of the building, then ultimately all of the building, and that's where the dental clinic was, and the office building, and upstairs, downstairs, and it's now named, I believe, the Caprino. Is the Caprino building still?
Oh, it's the Carl Kappa building, and the boardroom within it is the Joseph Caprino boardroom.
That's it. But that was the Caprino Furniture Building. And then we bought contiguous properties around that Caprino building for parking. So, we'd buy, demolish, buy. So that really was the office center for quite a long period of time was right there. I think it's called 880 East Second Street, I don't know
Yes.
if that was right. But that was Joe. And then ultimately, when he wanted to sell his house and downsize, again, made the house available to us at a very, very reasonable price, and we bought it, and now it's still being used. Both buildings are still being used. One incident, I gotta tell you, this was crazy. We had a board meeting at the Jones and Gifford, and Joe announced, sadly, that Mary was visiting her sister or something, but wasn't gonna be there. So we can't go there to the house, and he was really upset that he couldn't continue this ongoing, who cared? I mean, Joe, it's okay. No, we gotta do something. So I, in a most spur of the moment, said, all right, we're gonna adjourn this meeting and we're going to the swamp. So I took all these guys, all these cars, and we walked into the swamp along the decking, Oh, my God. So there was 12, 14 of us walk in. It shocked the swamp owner. And, we had beers and a burger or whatever it was. But, yeah, and then we carried on our meeting there.
Wow.
The swamp.
Wow. Something else about Joe. I've heard that, decades ago when Jamestown was much bigger and all the top performers would come through here, Anthony, there weren't wheelchair ramps. There weren't accessible places for Anthony and his wheelchair to be able to get to them. And I've heard that Joe would bring those entertainers back to his home so that Anthony could meet these people. Can you speak to that at all?
Absolutely. One of the benefits of going to Joe's house is he had 2 floors. Down the second floor in the basement was a huge card room, for lack of a better term, but a bar. I mean, it was perfect, big size. And though I was never invited, because I didn't know Joe at the time, but Joe was the largest advertiser of WJTN, by far. And the station manager who had the account for Joe was Merrill Rosen. And Merrill, together with the owner of WJTN, Cy Goldman, had for years a sports dinner, which I did attend the sports dinner. Unbelievable. Every big name in sports that were current at the time was in Jamestown. The Unitas, the Jimmy Browns, the Mickey Mantles, the Roger Marises, Jamestown. You couldn't get one of them now if your life depended on it. But anyways, they would come here, and they'd have the dinner. The dinner would end 10:30, and then Joe, because he was obviously Merrill, brought the bulk of them to Joe's house to thank Joe. Good marketing. And then, of course, Anthony could meet them. Absolutely true. And Anthony would get their signature, and there's pictures galore of the biggest names of my era in sports who came to Jamestown would end up in Joe's basement. So when you went there after the Resource Center, to me, I love going in the basement. And again, almost every month, looking at, eyeballing all of these pictures of Anthony with these incredible sports figures. So yes, that was Joe. We also had a big event, our first, I think, for the Resource Center, honoring a lifetime achievement at the Holiday Inn.
Right.
And it was Joe Caprino night. And everybody came out, and everybody talked. And there is a video of that, if anybody's interested, of that evening. And it was a fun time honoring Joe.
I remember that. I think that was the first fundraising event that we had for the newly formed TRC Foundation.
Yes. So yeah, Joe Caprino, a legend. So many stories. I don't know if I dare tell too many of them to the daughters who will be listening here. But so dedicated, and willing to provide at super deep discounts televisions, appliances, aside from everything else. And Joe was criticized because he got all the business, from his competitors. saying, it's unfair. You're not permitting us. And I took that kind of seriously, not because of Joe, but to answer those criticisms and saying, look, you can play in the game too, if you, and he did. Joe would show us what he paid, and he'd discount it more. And he took it over time, installments. So if we had to buy, pick a number, 50 televisions, or 20 dryers, or whatever, we bought it from him. Again, the competitors didn't like it, but they couldn't match it to save us all. And for the good of the resource center, which is ultimately what we had to do, we responded to all that. I could go on. Post-Journal, we were very blessed to have active interest in people like Don Meyer, the Post-Journal, and he helped us terrifically. And getting a lot of the information, thank you, getting a lot of that information out that we wanted to get out. So that was the beginning of public relations, press releases, because we really didn't do that early on. We just did it. In one sense, there was this kind of fly under the radar screen and try not to have people upset. Whenever we tried to place a group home, I'll talk about that now. We were confronted with a lot of NIMBYs. You're not in my backyard. We love the clients, but not here. And boy, the public hearings, because you had to go through a process of going and getting a public hearing, and that if this was in the best interest of the resource center, and it wouldn't naturally impact the neighborhood. Well, of course, to them, as soon as you had developmentally disabled people in the neighborhood, boom, down would go the values. Boom. And none of the statistics showed that. So I was the lead in all of that. And we knew we'd have 2 or 3 meetings every time. When Molly's were in the town of Bustard. And Dale Robbins, the supervisor, couldn't have been better and desirous to having us involved, but he knew it had to be a process. You have a public hearing, 100 people show up, and they're just pounding the table. And Greg, you just kind of smile. We'll have another meeting. 20 people show up. We'll have a third meeting. 5 people show up. And then they pass it. I mean, it was the way it went.
Interesting.
There was a law which really everybody was guided by for site selection. I want to say the Wicks law, but that's not it. But there's a law which guided the zoning requirements if you fit the category of being in a home for the benefit of developmentally disabled. So we follow that. And so that's how we placed all these homes through the municipalities. And as proof is shown, they were all very successful neighbors, and many of the neighbors then became volunteers. There was one particular guy who was really adamant against us, who was near Hunt Road and Howard. And man, he became the best. Because, boy, was I wrong. Was I wrong. And then he would go to the other meetings. I was one of you. Let me tell you, I was wrong. But that was we had to do a lot of public relations along this time period. Other people of note, Jane Fagerstrom. Jane, who was a legislator, very active to help us politically. Jane very active in the Democratic Party. She became a legislator. But she was very, very helpful in introducing us to the right people, and whenever we needed a strong word, and she was strong, she would give it. Bill Johnson. Bill Johnson, I interviewed him, and he was 101, but another MRC employee, TRW employee, and the nicest guy, most mellow guy. But boy, if he spoke, and he did occasionally, man, you listened. He synthesized things with a great deal of compassion, and he would take arguments that might have been going circular for a while and just, and Bill, you're dead on, and let's plow ahead. Jennifer Liuzzo. Jennifer, very active, worked a lot with the kids. And she was worked with the YWCA, I believe. So she was very active. I don't know if Jennifer's still active at all.
I don't think so.
Just again, kind of flying down a few. Rodney Nystrom, so dedicated to the cause. Jim Petro, oh my gosh. Jim was a kind of a professional master of ceremonies. He'd walk in a room, he had his gray hair, good Greek, and he knew everybody, slapped everybody on the back. But when you wanted him to work externally for you, he did it. He was out there, working meetings and stuff like that for the good of the cause. Or if you needed somebody at a public hearing, just come and be in the crowd, Jim. Work the crowd, because part of my gimmick was sit with, get a few people, but sit with the naysayers. Just sit with them. It's amazing how that mollifies the temperature. I always, during public hearings, got there fairly early, but I knew who the person who was going to be most adamant. I just sat next to him. Just sat, how you doing? How you doing? Didn't say much of anything. And then it would just reduce it. And so I thought, if I could do it, soak it on it. So I would ask few people, just come. Salt the crowd. Don't sit together, please don't. Don't sit together. Because that's worse.
Right.
Like that little minority, those guys over there. But Jim was one of those guys. George Privateer. George was an entrepreneur. He had a restaurant on Fluvanna Avenue. George, he was from Fredonia. George brought in as a fundraiser, I'll never forget this, like a Tuesday night, the Association. The song Windy, cherish is the word. And somehow he was able to ascertain that they were en route. And he had a fairly small restaurant. But it was the first fundraiser I can recall. And I'm not sure we made any money, but George pulled it off. I remember going with my wife, and it's got to have been the late 70s, the Association. Which reminds me of another fundraiser. Mike Raymond was able to get a DeLorean. A DeLorean.
I was going to ask about that, because that's the fundraiser I remember hearing about. I don't remember the association.
The DeLorean. So we sold all these chances to the DeLorean. I'm going to draw a blank as to how Mike got it, but it might have been a sale plus donation. We got it fairly inexpensively. And we did it at the Holiday Inn. And I remember Mike driving it around for a little bit, because of course he was dying. He was many times a single guy. That's a footnote in Mike Raymond's bio, by the way. But yeah, the DeLorean. And I forget who got it, but somebody got it, and then they in turn, drove it around, and it was so unusual. The crazy DeLorean, the sides coming up. Oh my gosh. Merrill Rosen, I mentioned. Merrill sells snow to an Eskimo. I should point out that it was Merrill, Mike Felice, and myself who came up with probably one of our more notable and successful fundraisers. This was the sale of season tickets. How that happened is season tickets for the benefit of the Jamestown Expos. My friend with Dan Lanetta. Dan Lanetta was the general manager for the Expos. His job was to come up after spring training, put together a packet of scorecards, and sell season tickets, and sell tickets, and sell signage, do everything in about 2 months. So I mentioned to Merrill one day, I said, what if we sold season tickets and we guaranteed Dan Lanetta, we'll be the sole season ticket holders, we're exclusive. And we get 40% of the gross, 40% of the gross, and we'll guarantee Dan that his net will be greater than his gross the prior year, and he won't have to work it. And we'll take it over. Billing, ticket distribution, everything. And so he agreed. He said, what do I got to lose? Nothing. So off we went. And now everybody, all our corporate contacts, now we're using every contact we have. Mine through Phillips Lytle, which was pretty extensive. He called everybody who was the CEO and says, you need to buy tickets. I never go to the game. Buy them and give them away. Buy them and give them back to us. We'll use them for the clients. Just buy them. And it's a fundraiser for us. Okay. Well, they had sold like 50 the year before. We ended up selling 600. 622, in fact. And it was Rosen using all of his WGATN contacts. Felice and Ray Hammerstrom was the sales manager for WKSN. So he was using all his contacts. So we had the radio's lists of all the advertisers. And of course, they were selling themselves at the same time. I'm not naive how this worked, but nevertheless, we sold and we made over $20-some thousand, our end. And we did that 3 years in a row. And so much so that the president of the Montreal Expos, Charles Brofman, now for those who might know, that's Seagram's, the president of Seagram's, flew down here, and there's a picture floating around in your archives of Mike, Raymond, Brofman, whoever the president was at the time, getting a check, for the resource center. Now, there were other fallout effects because it's gotten publicity. We were now in high gear publicity-wise. We were the exclusive agents for the Major League-owned Jamestown Expos. So ESPN came down here, Warner Fussell, working with Megan, I think it was Megan, no, not Megan Doyle, doctor's wife in Brussels, Pennsylvania.
Oh, right. With an F. Ann.
Yeah, well, anyways, Ann was the ticket agent. And so Ann was working it. She was our source of keeping track of all of us because we were just out selling. And, we'd meet almost weekly, ring the bell. It was a real rah-rah. And so Ann was in touch with Warner Fussell. Next thing you know, we have them come in and they do a segment at the ballpark with our clients. That was 1988. And the reason I know that is Marky Grissom, who became famous, was in Jamestown at the time, and he's featured in this production. And it's about a 5-minute long production. It was a nationally syndicated of the Jamestown Expo players playing with our clients. It was a hoot. It was a hoot. So for about 3 years, we were very successful. So much so, a little known fact, the vice president of the Montreal Expos came and visited me in the off-season, a guy named Bill Stoneman. Now, for you baseball guys, you'll know Bill Stoneman because he threw 2 no-hitters for the Montreal Expos. But he was a lawyer, businessman, baseball player. He had everything going for him. And he met with me, and he said, Greg, you're so successful, we got to change the percentage. Okay. So that means we got to sell more season tickets, which we're pretty tapped out. I mean, there's nobody's got an arm left for us to twist. And to make what we made last year, of which you guys didn't have to do anything. There was a disconnect. But we were so successful, it caught their attention. That was the point. So I said, all right, you got to throw us a bone. Just got to throw us a bone. And, you know, those uniforms that your Class A, your Jamestown Expos are, I know they're professional ones. They're the ones that start in Montreal and work their way down. So when you get done with the year, I know they just get packed up and you probably throw them away. Give them to us. Give them to us for our clients, for the softball team. Please, just give it to us. And then we might do the deal. And they said they didn't. I said, that's unfortunate, but we're done too. And so that was the end of it. That's how it ended. And Tom O'Reilly, who was the general manager, came in the next year, nicest guy, said, Greg, I understand I've got to sell season tickets. Indeed, good luck. Can I have your list? No, it's proprietary. And in fact I wasn't being, maybe a little bit, but pain in the ass because it had the names and phone numbers of all the CEOs. I mean, and all of the points of contact, which is very valuable. So we kept it. And I said, it's all listed. All the names are on the scorecard. If you want to call those people, but you're going to get their secretaries. Good luck. You know, I'll see you at the park, and we did. And we had resource center nights and other stuff. We didn't walk away from the whole thing. But that was the end of really a 3-year amazing program, which got captured on national attention, and it was a hoot, just such a hoot. But that was Merrill and Mike Felice and others, I should say. But those were, when Merrill, like I say, he could sell snow to an Eskimo, he was motivated. Virginia Rugg, who was board member, and I think a staffer, around forever together with Helen Eddy. Frida Eddy, excuse me. Man, they were just legendary from day one, but so gracious with the kids, so gracious. Hazel Salaba, Evelyn Sprague, just a Chorus Evans. These were mothers and wives of people who were developmentally disabled, and they were in it, man. They were in it deep. Betty Ward, Len York, Lucy Zoldas. I mention their names only because I remember them, and I'm going to be blamed for missing a few. But it's these were extraordinary people who really saw a time when there was really growth that was ignited, accelerated by Mike Raymond. Millions of dollars he was getting grants, millions and millions of dollars. And of course, then he had to do the deals, had to buy the properties. The early days, we would often lease properties, you know, from the Milt Battlers. And Milt, I should pause and thank him. Milt was an entrepreneur also, retired dentist, but he owned a lot of property. He would, or most importantly, he would work in conjunction with Mike, because Milt was no fool. Mike would find a piece of property or a location or a vacant land, and Milt would buy it. He would buy it. He would be essentially the bank, finance the construction, and then lease it to the resource center, because and this is the real good point, He made money, don't get me wrong. But he had enough faith in Mike and the Resource Center, and there was enough of a track record, he felt, for his purposes, they were very bankable. So Milt became the bank. So some of these homes on Harris, some of the homes on, off of 4 Avenue, that time period were Milt Battler. And that's another tip of the hat of somebody who unfortunately passed away too soon to be really recognized. But we became friends personally with Milt, and he really loved, I think, the challenge of working with Mike, no small challenge, but also developing a lot of activity in the Chautauqua County area. It was the first place. We had a building with a swimming pool which had the riser on it. I remember going up there the first time that, we'd get our suits on, and then they would lower it and then come back up. And it was just more of for us it was a toy, but for handicapped accessibility, wheelchairs, first time I'd ever seen that. Personnel. This is awful to try this stunt, but I got to talk about one person that, for as much as I was involved in the Resource Center operations, lawyer, board member, confidant of Mike and Paul, I never pulled rank. Never pulled rank and said, you need to do X, except once. Once. And the old timers will talk about it. And we were looking for an athletic director for the facility up on the east side of town here where the swimming pool was. People would go there for therapy and stuff like that. So we had a RFP. And one of the requests came from a guy named Al B. Miller. Now, you got to be my age to know that Al B. Miller was one of the foremost centers, linemen, for the Buffalo Bills during the world champion AFL days. Jack Kemp, Cookie Gilchrist, Albert Dubenian, Ed Rutkowski, Al B. Miller. Al was a wrestling superstar from Syracuse, but he was a high school athletic director and was in between jobs. So he applied. He applied. And Mike, unfortunately, showed it to me. Oh, we got to hire him. We must hire him. Got to do it, man. And so they did. And so we got an Al B. Miller day and Al B. Miller night, Al B. Miller golf, Al B. Miller this, because he knows the Bills. He knows the Bills. And let's begin dealing with all of that. And so Al would travel from like Hamburg every day. And wasn't perhaps, as it turns out, the most punctual guy to show up. But they loved him. The clients loved him because he was a big, burly, easygoing guy. And so, but his punctuality sort of got in the way at times, and I would be reminded, this is your guy, Greg. This is your guy. And Al, one of our first donations, one of our first donations was a pontoon boat, a houseboat, big one. And Mike got it. And we decided that one day we would have a board meeting on the pontoon boat. Another crazy thing to do. So we all met at a building that the Resource Center down at the boat landing, which the Resource Center purchased from John Gren. And it used to be one of the trolley car bus barns. And it's right on the boat landing. So we were there in the parking lot, and this boat was there, moored, and we all got on. And there was food, and there was everything. And it was just a beautiful and our captain was Captain Al B. Miller. And we kind of unleashed the ropes and push off. Well, as it turned out, Al couldn't get it started. And we now, the current of the Chautauqua is working our boat, and we're kind of saying, should we be nervous? Should we be nervous? Because we're kind of moving towards the 6th Street, bridge. And then if we get by through that, we're now on our way down to Warner Dam. And the boat just wasn't turning over. So finally, act of God, it did turn over, just kind of like when you're ready to go over the falls. And then we had a fairly brief board meeting with even a briefer food fest on that boat day. But that was Al B. Miller's job, was to get the boat running and stuff like that. So many stories, and that's one where I'm not sure there's many board members still alive to talk about that, but gosh, that was it. We love Al because he could tell war stories. Tell us about Cookie Gilchrist. Tell us about Billy Shaw, so on. Subsequently, he left. Subsequently, I don't know the reason for we had a dinner at Moonbrook, and I was MC, and somebody then came up like Bruce Piatz and managed to put in a frame an Al B. Miller card, in honor of my involvement with Al B. Miller. So someplace in my treasures are an Al B. Miller card given to me by the Resource Center for my one involvement in interfering in the day-to-day operations of the Resource Center.
That's great.
Yeah, Al B. Miller. But just for grin sometime, if you ever need a funny note from way back when, call Piatz. Bruce is still around. Ask him about Al B. Miller. He's got his own stories about Al. But that alone would be worth it. And Al's around. I think Al's still living. So it's, who knows? Al B. Miller. But which then segued to something, and I want to thank Steve about, we had an evening in conjunction with the Reese Jackson Center, which is where we are, a meaningful life. I don't think it's quite the exact term, but
I think it was called the value of a single human being.
Value of a single human being, which was the statement made by Spencer Tracy in Judgment at Nuremberg. And we had an event where it was a full-day event,
Right.
and speakers, et cetera, and that was the theme throughout. But the highlight for me was you were able to connect with Joe DeLambalure, Football Hall of Famer, Buffalo Bills, and his good friend, it's here, 1999. And they came down, and we did an interview. So I interviewed Joe first, and the place was packed because he's Joe DeLambalure. And then we brought in his friend who was developmentally disabled from Buffalo, and that's where I'm just.
It was 2008, if you've got the timeline there. His name is escaping me.
We'll get it. We'll get it for the camera. We'll get it. Don't go away. Don't go away. Yeah, 2008, Joe DeLambalure. And, oh, gosh. It's not mentioned. And what it was, the story was a person who had had some developmental disabilities, and Joe had attended as a guest a track meet. And this particular individual was running and ran it on a junior high or high school team, something like that. And of course ran way behind, but of course the crowd is really into this kid making it, and he made it. And so Joe was moved beyond belief to kind of hug him and do everything else. And they created a friendship. And then Joe started running with the kid. Because Joe, after his career was over, would run, 10Ks or something. And that became a big deal, their story together. And that they were featured that day. So I interviewed Joe, and then we brought him up. Likewise, that's on YouTube for those interested. And that was really a highlight moment here. DeLongmore couldn't have been nicer. Posed for a lot of pictures. Signed a lot of autographs. I've been kind of rambling along, Steve. Have you got notes where you'd say, ask me about?
Oh, sure. Yeah, a couple things. So you mentioned Joe DeLongmore. Another famous sports figure that you brought here to Chautauqua County was Carl Erskine.
Oh, Whisk.
And he threw one no-hitter, two no-hitters?
Two no-hitters.
Two no-hitters. Has a son with a developmental disability. I think that was the connection. You were always great at finding these connections to these famous sports figures and people with disabilities. So I've given you the prompt for Carl Erskine, so I'll let you roll with that.
We just put it on TV. We just put a piece and sent it out on the internet. It was 20 years ago. 20 years ago, 2001. And I had learned early on that the Jammers would be playing a home opener against the newly created Brooklyn Cyclone. That's huge, only because Brooklyn, that would be the first team from Brooklyn since the Dodgers left in '57. Big news. And the schedule gods were such that they were going to play an away game in Jamestown. So we got the first game. I'm not going to let this come and go, man. So early on, we had an advisory committee for the Jammers, and we got to do something special for this, because I knew the New York media would cover this. So they did. And I thought, how am I going to, and I read about in Boys of Summer, book about Carl Erskine. And he's from Anderson, Indiana. He's a big banker there. His son developmentally disabled, and he just essentially gave up the baseball to be with his son. And there's actually a video of him swimming and working with his son, who was developmentally disabled. And I thought, well, maybe that can touch, but he's a Brooklyn guy. So I reached out through the Anderson, Indiana Chamber of Commerce, because Carl Erskine, he's still there, but not naming the book. Got a hold of him, and he agreed for the Resource Center to come here. Oh, by the way, it's opening day for Brooklyn, too. Oh, well, that's good, but it was really this. So we created a double header, if you will, opening night, and then I think it was a luncheon or breakfast, something like that.
Lakewood Rod and Gun.
Lakewood Rod and Gun. So those are the two events. But now the word got out with the Brooklyn guys. Carl Erskine. Warner Fusel. Remember Warner Fusel? Of coming here, working with Ann Farrell. Ann Farrell. And now he's coming back as the announcer for Brooklyn. So I knew that. So Warner Fusel is coming back. Brooklyn's first game. I'm bringing in Carl Erskine. And so he's going to throw out the first pitch. Now, all the cameras in the world from New York City are on it, because this is big news. The USA Today has covered it. Everything's covered in Jamestown. And probably the biggest event we ever had. So Carl's out there warming up and pitching. And this I'll never forget. He just doesn't have a hat on. He's just kind of in a shirt, warming up. So I grabbed one of the ball players' hats. Normally they guard this. I said, this is for Mr. Erskine. So I walked over and gave him a Jammers hat, because it was sunny. And he put it on. So we got another hat for the other guy. And so he's just throwing it, and now all the cameras are on him, not with the Brooklyn Cyclone hat on, which was their mistake. No. Jammer's hat. And so there is Carl, and even during the first pitch, he's wearing the Jammer's hat. Fantastic.
That's great.
Publicity. So he throws out the first pitch. Now it gets better. Because Carl now is a superstar. I drag him around the ballpark. Place is packed. And we go upstairs. And, of course, Warner Fusel wants to interview him. We got Oysk. The Carl Erskine. And the other guy who was with him, the play-by-play, has to immediately move over. He's just beside himself because all he wants is an autograph of Carl Erskine. Anyways, talking about the good old days in Brooklyn, because they're broadcasting back to Brooklyn. So they're having a field day. And then it comes time, and Carl is a harmonica player. And he was going to take me out to the ball game during the 7th inning stretch. Okay. This is classic. And this is what's on the movie video. He's out there ready to, I walk him out. And I'm filming at the same time, so I'm doing this, filming him. And Dave Wellenzone, who was the general manager, had to bring out the microphone. He had the mic. Carl had the mic because he had with the harmonica, of course, to the extension so he could hear from the sound system. He's putting it in, and he breaks the pin. You can actually audibly hear the pin break. So he's trying to do this, and he can't do it. So we have to call it off and just simply go saying, we'll get back later, we'll be back. So it was a disaster. So then I don't know what possessed me. I said, let's go upstairs, and in between the next half inning, which would be the top of the 8th, we'll have the first ever top of the 8th take me out to the ball game in minor league history. And sure enough, he gets in there, and now he's got the house mic, and I'm videotaping, and every camera is packed in there like sardines. They want to get Carl playing, take me out of the ball game. And he gets done with the biggest big smile on his face. Simply saying, that's incredible, the first ever in minor league history. He was so ecstatic about having done that. But that wouldn't have happened without the resource center.
Oh, my God.
I mean, that's not to be lost. His appearance is because of that. And then we had a brunch, lunch, and he spoke at there, and you had a good crowd, and I think we raised money for the Liquid Rod and Gun did that. And so that was Carl Erskine, and he spoke very passionately about his son. And that's really a great story. He's still alive. Carl is still alive in his 90s. That was I'm glad you brought that up. It was a magic moment.
Well, and you're such a big baseball fan, big sports fan, and you have the passion for the history of the game and for bringing these people in. And I think the Resource Center has been very lucky and fortunate to have been the beneficiary of your graciousness by bringing these people in, but bringing these people in also to provide some benefit to the resource centers as an organization, but also to the people that we support. I started here in '93, and one of my earliest memories, Greg, was you bringing some Buffalo Bisons players and the mascot to the Michael J. Raymond Center, middle of the afternoon someday, and maybe they were coming down for something else in the area too, but came over to meet with the people that are in our day program over there. And boy, did those folks get a kick out of having the players there, the Bison mascot there. I think maybe you did the same thing with the Bills. I can't remember.
Yeah, we did. Bisons had caravans for a few years, and so they wanted to go to the various communities, and I had a legal relationship and a friend relationship with Mike Bellani and that group of the Bisons, and so we were a natural outlet. While they're here, can you bring Al Martin, Jeff Richardson, many guys who went on to major leagues. They came in to do a 3-day caravan, the Rochester area, the Jamestown area, Buffalo. Yeah, and so it was great to expose them, and it was great for the players. They loved and it was encouraged that they deal with that situation. So it was all good. Yeah.
Now, another thing that you did that blended your support for people with disabilities with your passion for Robert H. Jackson was that Woodstock, the Music of the First Amendment event back in 2011, I think it was. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Wow, that's another highlight. Yeah, I do. The backstory is we did twice a year continuing legal education programs at the center. And the Resource Center would be always interested and helpful and participated in sponsoring it. Why? One, they had access to lawyers, for the foundation purposes, and they were all here. And if you were at a sponsorship table, you could meet them. And it was a PR opportunity. And so that was one thing. So you had a history of participating with us on these CLEs. At the same time, Judge Judith Kaye, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals of New York State, had an event where it was kind of called the Sounds of Justice, or the Scales of Justice. Scales of Justice, which sort of played off of law and music. So that's where an idea came. I said, Woodstock, the music of the First Amendment. And so we came up with this crazy idea. And I thought this was going to work only if I got some talent. So I reached out to Sam Yasgur. Sam Yasgur, an attorney, I knew of him from Sullivan County, which is where Bethel, New York is. But also the son of Max Yasgur, who had the farm where it was held. So I reached out, I said, here's a crazy idea. Would you be willing to come here? We'd celebrate your dad, Max Yasgur. We'd celebrate Woodstock, where it was held. And I know you were a young lawyer at the time at Woodstock. Yeah, sure, I'd be glad to. So not only did he come, but he wrote up an amazing 2-hour speech on Woodstock and his experience, and we interspersed it with scenes from the Woodstock concert, Joe Cocker, Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and we even started our whole show. It was a 4-hour show, where I had everybody rise, and we were, instead of playing the national anthem, or saying the Pledge of Allegiance, we had Jimi Hendrix. Crazy. But the highlight was I knew at the time the Resource Center was making shirts. And they were making tie-dye shirts. I go, fantastic. So you guys, as part of your sponsorship and public relations, made shirts, tie-dye shirts that had Woodstock, the music of the First Amendment, the date, location, and on the back, a little bit of a plug for the Resource Center. I made everybody wear them. I said, the only way you're going to get continuing legal education credit is if you wear it. And so I'm sure I've shared with you the picture, of, maybe you took the picture, I don't know. But, this place is packed, including the speakers. Even the speakers wore the shirt. It was crazy. And to conclude the whole event of Woodstock, the music of the First Amendment, we had as our luncheon interviewee for me was Corey Wells, lead singer of Three Dog Night. Now, if that alone would have packed the place, having him here, but we had Sam Yasgur, we had a guy who was actually was involved in the evaluation of the Nixon Watergate tapes here. We had just an incredible array of people all around that. But yeah, in the middle of it all was the Resource Center's willingness to think crazily and outside the box, do that. And we did that one other time too, where we got tie-dye shirts. So yeah, you brought that up.
Well, giving credit to the Resource Center. These are all your ideas. We just help you follow through with them to the extent that you need us to. But I think these things would take place regardless. As I said, I think we're fortunate that we've been the beneficiary as you've been plotting and planning these things, that, you know what, I think I've got a way that I can bring the resource center into this. So
Yeah.
thank you very much for doing that.
Well, thank you.
You know, one other, I mentioned him earlier, but one other person, just to touch on, because very important in the history of the Resource Center and the Jackson Center and other places around town, but never an employee or a board member of the Resource Center per se, is Carl Kappa. And, you know to what extent you'd like to discuss Carl's influence on, almost to your point, Greg, of bringing people well-respected into the community, into the TRC fold to enhance our reputation.
Yeah, Carl was related to Joe Caprino. So Carl had an interest in us, but never an official interest that I'm aware of. He was a founder of the Chautauqua Region Community Foundation, which we used as a funding source to benefit us, or grants would come from the Community Foundation, and we'd have Carl write a letter or two. But he was kind of there, but he wasn't. But Carl then had the idea, and this was purely him. He wanted now to do something in his later life to benefit the Resource Center, and so he it was not uncommon to have Monday golf tournaments at Moonbrook. So he said, let's have I don't know if it was called the Kappa Classic at the time.
Yeah, it was Carl Kappa Golf Classic was the original name.
Was
of
that the original
tournament.
name?
Yes.
Okay. And so he was the chairman, and I was on the first or second years of it, first and second years. And it was Greg Bender and Merle Rosen and Joe Caprino might have been still alive.
Sam Restivo, I think, was
Sam
involved.
Restivo,
Mike
yep.
Felice, I think, as
Yep.
well.
Thank you. But he called up, he blew the whistle and called everybody. And he wanted to do this golf tournament. And Carl had the staff send out a letter, we're at a golf tournament, please support us, all benefits go to the Resource Center. And all proceeds did go to the Resource Center. And Carl wanted to make it special, and he would then said for the premiums, they normally would get a sleeve of balls or something. No, not Carl. He gave them golf shoes, golf clubs, golf bags, and he would really go extraordinary. So it got to become the go-to classic of all the Monday not-for-profits that had events at Moonbrook. The Resource Center was the one. And Carl supported it through Crawford Furniture, and I suspect personally as well, to make sure they got certain goals. And the ultimate was they got to $100,000 one year. $100,000. To this day, that is the huge gold standard for any golf tournament. And then there was the year, the Kappa Classic. But behind the scenes, and I'll just share this, Carl was the chairman. In a sense, first couple years, he was going to make sure it got off the ground. So there was guys from the staff, Greg Bender, there were guys from the board, there were people in the community who were, like Merrill and Mike and myself, who were no longer doing the, things for the expos. Carl kind of wonderfully selected all of us for the good of the cause. But what I remember most is he would hand out names to people to call. I remember this so distinctly. And I won't tell the names of the people. But we'd report. Weekly, we'd report. Carl was there physically at the meeting. He was just a name. He was physically there. And you better report well. I talked to so-and-so, and they're going to give us 500. So-and-so, 1,000. There was first couple meetings, I talked to somebody, and they're not going to do it this year. Carl goes, is there a phone? So they brought in a phone into the boardroom down on 2nd Street. And he'd get on the phone, he goes, "Hi, this is Carl Capper, just got a report that you were unable to support my golf tournament. I wonder if you'd reconsider." Well, absolutely, Carl, absolutely. So he put the touch, personal touch. And he didn't ask his lieutenants to do it, he just did it himself. And then the word spread. If you don't want a call from Carl, you support it. So that was the beginning of a tradition. If Carl asked, you supported. Or if Carl had even a lieutenant, because somehow you felt it was going to get back to him. And Carl was so well respected that you didn't want that to happen. And so it was very effective.
That's great.
Very effective. And then he got corporate sponsors and other, if you were a vendor of the Crawford, if you were a vendor of the Resource Center, if you held the accounts, the stockbrokers, everybody was tapped. And rightfully so. I wasn't offended by that at all. So were we. And I'm glad to support it. But that was the force of personality which led to a very successful golf tournament. I could just segue to another successful, the Gus Macker, which has had a history, which you, Steve, you probably could speak to even more, but for many years, it was the Resource Center on its own, which developed this or worked with a national company called Gus Macker to bring to Jamestown this three-man basketball tournament. Vicky Bardo, who was the sort of the director of development. Steve, you were involved. Paul, executive director. So for several years, that got to be the preeminent basketball tournament at various venues where it was held. Are there other kind of people at the beginning who I failed to mention?
We touched briefly on him in terms of the TRC, the Carl Kappa Golf Classic, and kind of referenced him earlier with Allied Industries, but Greg Bender and what he brought to TRC when he came on board.
Yep.
If there's anything you wanted to say about Greg?
I do. Greg and I played baseball together. We grew up in the same neighborhood on the south side of town. Greg is a tremendous source of inspiration. He contracted polio at a very young age, at a time when polio was ravaged the country. And frankly, Greg, though he developed that, played sports incredibly well, very incredibly successfully, and we in the neighborhood just sort of didn't think anything of it. Just didn't think anything of it. And there were a couple others in the neighborhood who similarly had some, the term they used then, handicapped, but played well, and they adapted well. And Greg was one of them. His dad was a baseball manager, and Greg was a credible pitcher, hitter, first baseman, all that. So we got to know each other throughout school. He was a year or two older. And then he was the plant manager of, I think it was Adlock, up on the hill. And they were closing down. And Greg called me and said, "Do you know of any place?" I said, "Well, there was a place called Allied Industries, which is an industrial operation, and certainly having good talent, and you're a survivor, if you will, a successful survivor of a handicap, and you might find this worthwhile, so why don't you go down and talk?" And I think, talk to the executive director. I think Mike may have left by then, but we may have been Paul. But anyways, they did. Greg got the job. and then the rest with the Javits, Day, Wagner, Allied Industries, military contracts. Greg was on the board. Greg brought a tremendous amount of attention to our Allied Industries. It launched. It was very successful. In fact, for many years, its profitability funded many of the programs. And that really was led by, inspired by Greg. But yeah, there's this backstory of kind of how did you get at least exposed to it, and that's one of the prouder ones, That's one I did suggest, sort of like Al B. Miller, but nobody gave me a baseball card of Greg Bender yet.
Oh, well, talked about Greg being a great baseball player. He's a tremendous golfer.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of business gets done on the golf course. And I think that was helpful in Greg being able to have the Resource Center be the beneficiary of a lot of those federal government contracts that went in because they knew about us.
No question. I mean, Greg's ability to play golf helped us at Kappa. He was the organizer. He was the staff person behind Carl. And he'd had experience, certainly by participating in Moonbrook tournaments, winning Moonbrook tournaments. And Greg likewise has a following unto himself. Glad you brought up Greg.
Greg, you had mentioned earlier about the 2017 ceremony we had where you received the Lifetime Achievement Award. And when I was going back and looking at the YouTube video from that event, you were referencing the fact that you've been involved with now the Resource Center for 44 years, and in all that time, we've had 3 executive directors. And I know you've mentioned a little bit today, obviously, about Mike Raymond, Paul Chisana, now our current CEO, Denise Jones, but I just wanted to see if you wanted to expound a little bit on Paul and Denise.
I listened to that, and it reminded me of just that fact, that what organization can look back over close to 50 years when Mike Raymond took over for Mike Trowbridge up until now, and it's just 3 people. And Paul Shazana, now talking about him, had previously worked at the center and then left for another good job. And then when Mike retired, there was a vacancy, and then Paul had applied, and we were glad to get him back. And Paul saw our sustained and enhanced a controlled growth. There was Mike Raymond, sort of that chaotic growth, and I say that in the nicest sense. I mean, we kind of had a plan, but it was growing in many senses for growth's sake. More building, go, go, go. Hopefully there was money to support it, and there was. And then we got to a certain point where you'd say, well, now we got to make sure we sustain this. And that's where Paul's really strong suit was. Paul came in and was able to have a controlled growth, and it was under Paul that we got to a $100 million budget. My gosh. Now that drew a lot of eyebrows. The Resource Center, that not-for-profit, people that, we see them around, and yes, they have these Allied Industries, which makes government, we're not sure what. They even have some other entities which have cleaning services, and they have, they're up in North County, South County, but $100 million. I mean, other not-for-profits were just envious. But that was Paul. And so that was a really growth, like I say, controlled growth, and that's my term. I'm not sure anybody's ever used it, but a controlled growth time period. And then Paul retired, and then Denise, who had been with the finance department for extended period of time, and it really had been was she the assistant director?
Associate executive director.
Associate executive director. So she was naturally had a history and became its leader and still remains it. Has gotten all kinds of recognition and accolades as, in the top 100 in Western New York, and justifiably so. And is young enough so that we'll be blessed to have her leadership for a period of time. I knew Denise. She's a native of Jamestown. And she was Denise Fields. I mean, in an earlier life, I knew her parents. So it's been great fun to watch her develop and tremendously so. So yeah, one of the legacies of the Resource Center is that good place to work, and it's got where the challenges galore, corporations galore. They have created a legal department within it there, and that has all created, again, a great degree of stability. And here we are in 2021 to really note the Resource Center is really one of the stalwarts businesses in our business community. So when you talk about the top 10 employers in Chautauqua County, there's the Resource Center. When you talk about the top 10 companies which have budgets the size that it does, it's the Resource Center. That's a long way from Harold Swanson-led $1 million budget. And I guess I'm personally pleased to be able to kind of have watched this happen for the good of the community. And they really are an incredible asset to us here. And that's a sense of pride for everybody who works there and then some.
You had, Greg, you spoke earlier about the perception of the Resource Center in the 70s when you had gotten on board of, an organization that was doing work that maybe nobody else wanted to do and helping people that were kind of pushed aside by society. And just wanted to get your thoughts on how that has changed in the 4 decades since then, and how people with disabilities are viewed and welcomed and valued even as part of the community now.
Well, you go back to that program we had of the value of a single human life, and that's exactly what's been understood, appreciated. I'll give you, for instances, you often will go to programs and events, and there'll be a bus from the Resource Center, and there'll be developmentally disabled people who will be participating, joining in the crowd, and nobody thinks otherwise. I mean, it's accepted. I can't say that would have occurred 40 years ago. There would have been a reluctance on the staff's part to even bring them. Just like we don't want to be embarrassed. And now it's part of the fabric. And they're placed in employment opportunities. You see them in the community. Nobody walks away from or thinks otherwise. If anything, they go up and support it. That's sort of a sea change in over 40-some years in our community. So the client has been, it's been a value. It really has been. And there have been a few in the early days that I think back of Henry, Henry Wesley.
Henry Wesley.
My gosh. What a story of him, but nevertheless was sort of a early role model. And there were others like that. Once you heard their stories and met them, and you could communicate with them, or they tried to communicate with you, and it was meaningful. And it's now become much more the norm, and that really has been the outreach programs that the Resource Center has developed in so many ways. I mean, there's so many opportunities to bring the community in and for the clients and the resource community to go out. And I think that's been very effective. And I applaud the staff for doing that. Because that's not easy. That is not easy stuff. But they do it. And they do it, and they do it successfully.
Amen. The one thing I note about you, Greg, is you always seem to be having a good time. I'm not sure I've ever seen you in a foul mood. I'm sure you have them, but we don't see them. We appreciate everything that you've done for the Resource Center. Again, you have a lot of varied interests. You have a lot of initiatives in the community you support, and we very much appreciated the things that you have done that have given some exposure to the Resource Center when you didn't need to do that, but you did, and have benefited the people with disabilities that we support. I know you're a big baseball fan. We have our annual Greg Peterson TRC night at the ballpark. Looking forward to doing that, but are you optimistic about baseball returning to Jamestown this year?
Oh, yeah, Jamestown Tarp Skunks, for those watching. The baseball will be back, home opener, June 10th. There'll be some restrictions. I'd be naive if I didn't say that, but they're opening up a lot of spaces to about 33% capacity. I suspect that's where we will be, which is 1,000 people or so, and that's great. That's a great day at the ballpark. So currently we have a group, Jamestown Community Baseball LLC, which owns the franchise. It consists of over 30 local individuals who are all members, stakeholders, if you will, of the Jamestown Community Baseball, known as the Jamestown Tarp Skunks. And you'll have to go to the ballpark to find out what that all means.
Fantastic. I think that's all I have, Greg. Ed, anything we're forgetting?
No. Well, I mean, you could go on forever, really.
Well, if you got something that'll get you different, okay. Well, it's been fantastic, and I appreciate you sending me over this items, and I appreciate also the annual opportunity to go to the ballpark and reflect on relationships of baseball, community, the Resource Center, and also honor an employee or a client that can throw out the first pitch. I don't want to show that. I don't want to even showcase that anymore. But always glad to participate. And who knows? We're still working on Scotty Bowman, by the way. We're still working.
I've heard you mention that white whale of yours that for a number of years now. So maybe we'll get him.
2021. Stay tuned. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good. Yes. Well, I've tried everything there. Everybody, Denise, because Scotty Bowman, he still lives in Buffalo, to my knowledge. And his son is developmentally disabled and goes to the, or did go, to one of the resource centers out in Buffalo. Scotty doesn't do a lot of public speaking. He's not a guy who will be out doing this, but he might, like Erskine. He might do it, and that's where I've always encouraged somebody, find out who it is in your contemporary CEO world. So it's not lost on me or Randy Lewis, because he would like to do it, make it happen. I said, we're working it, but gosh, Scotty's got to be 80 now. In fact, I'm going to go back and put that on my legal pad, just of things to do, because seems to me, I had a phone number, but it turned out to be a fax number. Yeah, Bowman. That's the one that got away. The one you wake up and say, there's still one left to do. Still one left to do.
Well, you've been great because we don't have that knowledge, that sports-related knowledge to know to go pluck those people. So you got Carl Erskine, you got Joe DeLamalora. It's just phenomenal. I'm amazed that you're able to do this.
Well, are you guys planning on doing something? I know you did last fall, you were trying to do something, but of course COVID wiped out everything. Are you trying to do something sort of?
An awards?
Well, anniversary, I know you were trying to do something in the fall of last year, bring in a bunch of people. And there were some, I think it was.
Oh, right, yeah.
It was a writer, a sports writer, or I forget what it was.
Trying to do something with the Comedy Center and Blind Association. I forget. Oh, I think we were even trying something with the Jackson Center, right?
You were. I've drawn a blank as to the name that jumped up either at me or you, and we talked about it.
Right. I can't, yeah, it's been over a year since we talked about that. We get the reg involved as well, and I think we're trying to find somebody for each of those things that would, be a draw as what's going to bring people in, but I can't remember what the connections were at this point. I have to go back and look at my notes. I think there were some anniversaries, I think it was the 45th anniversary of Willowbrook and 70, maybe something, was it maybe the 20th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and so there were a couple of those, 5, 10-year milestone year things that were going on that we were kind of looking at, but I can't remember who the personalities themselves were that we were thinking about. One was a blind and autistic singer who won one of the talent shows on TV. I can't remember which one it was, and I think that was the one thing that we nailed down. But the rest of it's escaping me.
Yeah, there was a writer. I remember reading, there was a blurb about him, and he was
Right.
I don't think it was a sports writer or something. It was just, and he talked about developmentally disabled, and it was very wonderfully done. And it might have been it was a notable. Well, when we get back into the live performancing.
Right. Right.
I'm just trying to think of guys that are still, I'm sorry, wait.
No, there was an error prior to it, where January 1971 is when they remodeled what is now the WCA Services Center. And I was one of the volunteers that spent that overnight event that Mike Drugwich had sponsored, or whatever. Mike's still around, I think.
Is he really?
Yes, he lives in Connecticut. Last I knew, he owned like a lawn, one of those lawn fertilizer businesses. I could probably find his contact. I don't know if we want to go through any of that history or not. That was prior to, like I said, 71.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember hearing about that weekend with 1,000 volunteers coming in, and plumbers and painters and architects and high school kids and everybody coming in.
High school kids.
Yeah, I don't know how they pulled that off. That's amazing.
I don't think it was 1,000 volunteers, but it was a lot. And it was an all night event. So people worked literally all night long.
I remember hearing about that. Lawyers in town, whose name is escaping me. Not this lawyer in town. D'Angelo.
Chuck, yeah.
What I think was the head of the, some JHS civics club or something. So he was, kind of the leader.
He would have been a junior, because I was.
Okay.
That was my senior year.
Interesting.
My gosh, I made highlights, but I didn't refer to them. Things like when we bought Johnson Florist, plants and things. Remember that? And we bought it we thought that was a great activity for the clients to make, to grow,
Stuff.
how thing. And then the idea, of course, we weren't very good at distribution. We were growing it, but I remember that, and Hugh Carey came here.
Right. Whatever happened with that Harrison Industries initiative, Greg, where they were going to build something down on Harrison?
That's why Mario Como came here. That was the announcement of Harrison. I didn't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
But that is recording? Okay, that's fine. Then we'll talk about it. Yeah, that was the idea. It came in for the Harrison. It was buying some property down there, which was the old Lundquist Hardware, and a bunch of property. There was a contract behind that was going to come in that would underwrite the costs. We had to have a contract for the development for whatever we were going to do there, and that contract fell through. So we didn't want to buy all the buildings, and because it was quite a few that we had options on. So that that was one of the only things that we really had to take a deep breath and decide not to even start it. Now, some of these things, plants and things, we started and then made the decision to get out of that business. Benedict, Harris, Early Learning Center, Foot Avenue, the Resource Center Pharmacy, I remember that, Jones and Gifford. Caprino's name change. Chautauqua County was dropped because there was a misconception that we were an agency of the county. I remember that.
Understandable.
And how we moved the Dunkirk workshop from the on the lake on Lake Erie. That was the old
Is that the Peace Commissary?
went to the Seas Commissary.
Okay.
Yeah, from a church owned facility. What was it called? St. Bernard, something. I remember that was a big move. And we're still at the commissary, aren't we?
Yes.
Or was that the Loblaws building?
Are they, if they're not one and the same, then we're currently still at the Loblaws building.
Yeah. Gained national spotlight of the Gulf War, the helmet covers. You should interview Greg about the history of the Allied. There's a lot that went on there.
Yeah.